The hum of the engines reverberated through the launch station as Admiral Kayla Sloan stood tall on the command dais, her uniform immaculate, her gaze unwavering. Before her, the live feed broadcasted across every colony in the solar system captured her steel-gray eyes, framed by a face that bore the weight of countless battles. Humanity needed hope, and she was its symbol. Today, she began, her voice firm and resolute. We embark on a journey unlike any other in our history. The Crimson Horizon Project is not just an expedition. It is a declaration that humanity's spirit cannot be contained, that no boundary, no nebula, no obstacle will keep us from forging our destiny among the stars. Her words ignited applause across the gathered officers and technicians in the command center. Behind her, a massive viewport revealed the jewel of their fleet, the Erebus, a titanic warship bristling with advanced weaponry and cutting-edge exploration technology. It was the crown jewel of Earth's might, surrounded by a flotilla of smaller ships ready to follow it into the unknown. Kayla continued, "For too long, we've been constrained by the limits of our reach. Our colonies struggle to sustain themselves, our resources dwindle, and our people grow restless. But no longer. The Crimson Nebula calls to us, a treasure trove of worlds untouched, a frontier waiting to be claimed. We will seize it, not out of greed, but out of necessity. For survival, for progress, for the future." The camera panned to the command crew of the Erebus, seated at their stations, determination etched into their faces. Among them was Lieutenant Commander Jace Calder, a tactical prodigy with a reputation for unorthodox strategies, and Chief Engineer Leela Ortega, whose innovations had saved the fleet on more than one occasion. They had been chosen for this mission not just for their skills, but for their unyielding loyalty to the Admiral. As Kayla's speech continued, murmurs spread among the civilian population watching on their screens. The project had been controversial, with critics calling it reckless to venture so deeply into uncharted space. Rumors of previous expeditions lost in the nebula hung like ghosts over the celebration. But in that moment, Kayla's confidence seemed unshakable. "In the coming weeks," she said, her voice dropping slightly, "we will face challenges that will test the limits of our technology, our courage, and our humanity. But make no mistake, we will prevail, because we are not just explorers. We are humanity's vanguard, the spearhead of Earth's unbreakable resolve." As the speech concluded, the station erupted in cheers. The countdown to launch had begun. Technicians scurried to finalize systems checks, while officers relayed last-minute orders to the fleet. Kayla descended from the dais, her stride purposeful as she headed toward the command bridge of the Erebus. Behind her, the massive view of Earth began to shrink, a reminder of what was at stake. "Admiral," Jace Calder greeted her as she entered the bridge. "The fleet is ready. All ships report green across the board." Kayla took her seat, the weight of her role settling on her shoulders. "Good. Signal the fleet to prepare for departure. The Crimson Nebula awaits." As the countdown ticked closer to zero, the Erebus powered up, its engines glowing like molten stars. Kayla allowed herself a brief moment of reflection. She knew what this mission meant, not just for Earth, but for her. This wasn't just a voyage into the unknown. It was a test of her ability to lead humanity's survival. "Engage," she commanded. The fleet surged forward, breaking through the fabric of known space. Behind them, Earth grew smaller, its people watching with bated breath as humanity's greatest gamble began. The fleet pierced the crimson veil, engines glowing against the swirling hues of the nebula. The Erebus led the way, its hull reinforced to endure the strange gravitational currents detected upon entry. Kayla Sloan stood at the viewport of the command bridge, her eyes fixed on the swirling red tendrils surrounding them. The nebula was unlike anything they had encountered before, alive with an eerie, almost otherworldly beauty. "Admiral, sensors are struggling to maintain cohesion," Lieutenant Commander Jace Calder reported from his station. His voice, though calm, carried a note of concern. The nebula's interference is stronger than anticipated. Scanners are picking up massive fluctuations in energy fields, but no signs of danger. Yet, Kayla nodded, her instincts honed by years of command. Something about the nebula felt off. The way the crimson clouds seemed to pulse and shift, almost as if they were aware of the fleet's presence, unsettled her. But she kept her face neutral. Fear would ripple through the crew like wildfire if she allowed doubt to show. "Chief Engineer Ortega," she said, turning toward the comms console, "can we reinforce the sensor array? I don't like flying blind." Ortega's voice crackled through the speakers. "Working on it, Admiral. This interference is like nothing I've seen before, almost like it's deliberately jamming us. Give me an hour to reconfigure the long-range arrays. Short range should hold steady in the meantime." Kayla nodded again, her gaze drifting back to the viewport. She trusted her crew, but she couldn't shake the unease coiling in her gut. Suddenly, a sharp alarm rang out across the bridge. Calder's fingers flew across his console. "Admiral, one of our scout ships, the Horizon, just vanished from sensors." The room fell silent. Vanished. Kayla's voice was cold, focused. "Explain." "I don't know, ma'am. They were running a standard reconnaissance pattern ahead of us. No distress signal, no sign of attack. They were there 1 second, gone the next." Kayla's jaw tightened. "Can you pinpoint their last known location?" Calder nodded and brought up a holographic display. A faint blip marked the Horizon's position before disappearing entirely. "This is all we have. No wreckage, no debris. It's like they were erased." "Send a retrieval team," Kayla ordered. "But keep them tethered. I won't lose another ship." As the retrieval team launched, the tension on the bridge grew palpable. Every officer remained glued to their station, scanning for any sign of the missing ship. Minutes dragged by like hours. "Admiral," Ortega's voice cut through the silence, strained. "We're picking up faint readings from where the Horizon disappeared. The energy signature is unnatural. Nothing we've encountered before." Before Kayla could respond, the retrieval team's comms crackled to life. "Admiral, this is Captain Vega. We found something." The bridge crew held their breath as Vega's voice continued. "It's a fragment of the Horizon, embedded with some kind of alien material. I've never seen anything like it." Kayla's eyes narrowed. "Bring it back, and get your team out of there. Now." The retrieval team's engines roared as they turned back, but their departure was interrupted by a sudden surge in the nebula. The crimson clouds swirled violently, and strange shapes seemed to form within the mist. "Admiral," Calder said, his voice tight with alarm. "We're not alone." Kayla stared out the viewport, watching as massive, shadowy figures began to emerge from the crimson haze. Her unease solidified into grim certainty. Whatever had taken the Horizon was here, and it was watching them. "Battle stations," she ordered, her voice steady. "Prepare for contact. Let's show them what humanity is made of." The fleet braced as the shadows drew closer, the crimson nebula shifting around them like a living thing. Kayla Sloan gripped the armrest of her chair, her gaze locked on the encroaching shapes. The real test of the crimson Horizon had begun. The bridge of the Erebus was bathed in the dim glow of crimson light as the shadowy figures solidified within the nebula. Tension gripped the air, the crew's unease mirrored by the faint hum of the ship's systems. Then a shape broke free of the swirling mist, a vessel, vast and alien, dwarfing even the Erebus. It was unlike anything humanity had ever encountered, its surface a shifting mosaic of dark, organic patterns and pulsing veins of light. "Admiral," Jace Calder called out, his voice low but urgent, "we're being scanned. Some kind of directed energy field, highly advanced, far beyond our tech." "Shields to maximum," Kayla Sloan ordered, her eyes locked on the alien vessel. "Comms, open a channel. Let's see if they want to talk." The crew worked quickly, and moments later, A haunting voice resonated through the bridge, speaking a language that twisted and echoed unnaturally. The translator struggled before it finally resolved into coherent words. "We are the Rathak," the voice declared, cold and commanding. "You trespass in sacred space. Withdraw immediately or face annihilation." Kayla rose from her command chair, her presence commanding. "This is Admiral Kayla Sloan of the United Earth Fleet. We come in peace, seeking resources and knowledge to ensure our survival. We mean no harm to your people." The Rathak emissary's voice responded without hesitation. "Your survival is irrelevant. The Crimson Nebula is a sanctuary of the ancients, untouched by lesser beings. Those who defile it are destroyed." Kayla's jaw tightened. She glanced at Calder, who gave a subtle nod, indicating their scanners had detected multiple Rathak vessels lurking in the nebula. They were surrounded. Still, retreat was not an option, not with Earth's future hanging in the balance. "Respectfully," Kayla replied, her voice calm but firm, "we cannot leave. Humanity's survival depends on the resources within this nebula. We are prepared to defend ourselves if necessary." A long, oppressive silence followed. The Rathak ship remained still, its imposing presence radiating menace. Finally, the voice returned, colder than before. "You have been warned." The transmission ended, and the alien vessel surged forward, its hull shimmering with energy. "Admiral," Calder said urgently, "multiple contacts inbound. Rathak ships closing from all directions." "Battle stations," Kayla barked. "Prepare to engage. Let's show them humanity doesn't back down." The fleet snapped into action, weapons powering up and shields reinforcing. The Erebus unleashed its first salvo, a barrage of missiles streaking toward the advancing alien vessel. They detonated against its hull, but instead of damaging the ship, the explosions seemed to ripple harmlessly across its surface. "They're absorbing the impact," Calder exclaimed. "Switch to beam weapons. Focus fire on the weak points." The Erebus fired its main cannon, a brilliant beam of energy that struck the alien ship's core. For a moment, the vessel shuddered, its movements faltering. But then, with a surge of power, it retaliated. Lances of crimson energy erupted from its hull, carving through one of humanity's frigates like it was paper. Kayla clenched her fists as alarms blared. The Rathak were not just advanced. They were devastating. But humanity had faced extinction before, and she refused to let fear consume her. "Ortega," Kayla called. "I need solutions, now." "Working on it, Admiral," Ortega replied over the comms. "There's something odd about their energy signatures. It's almost like their weapons are powered by the nebula itself. If we can disrupt that connection, we might stand a chance." Kayla nodded, her mind racing. "Calder, coordinate with Ortega. Find a way to sever their link. Until then, we fight." The Erebus and its fleet pressed on, their courage unyielding even as the Rathak closed in. The nebula itself seemed to thrum with energy, the crimson mist shifting like a living tide. Kayla knew they were outmatched, but humanity had never been one to surrender. "Brace yourselves," she said, her voice steady. "This is only the beginning." The battle for the Crimson Nebula had begun. The Erebus shuddered violently under the impact of another crimson energy lance, the bridge lights flickering as the shields struggled to hold. Kayla gripped the armrest of her chair, her focus unwavering despite the chaos around her. On the tactical display, the Rathak ships continued their relentless assault, their movements unnervingly coordinated, as if guided by a singular, hive-like intelligence. "Status report." Kayla barked over the din of alarms. "Shields at 58% and dropping." Calder shouted from his console. 3 escort frigates down, and the Resolute is reporting critical damage to their propulsion systems." Kayla's mind raced. The Rathak weren't just superior in firepower. Their tactics were brutally efficient, designed to overwhelm and isolate. The fleet couldn't sustain this kind of onslaught for much longer. She needed a way to turn the tide. And fast. "Ortega," Kayla snapped into the comms. Tell me you found something. Chief Engineer Leela Ortega's voice crackled through the speakers, filled with tension. Admiral, I've been analyzing the energy readings from their weapons and propulsion systems. It's confirmed. They're drawing power directly from the nebula itself. The energy field around us isn't just interference. It's a resource for them, like an endless battery. Kayla's eyes narrowed. Can we disrupt it? Maybe, Ortega replied. The nebula's energy field operates on a unique frequency. If we can overload it with a resonant pulse, it might destabilize their connection. But there's a catch. There always is, Kayla muttered. What's the catch? We'll have to use the Erebus's main reactor to generate the pulse, Ortega said grimly. It'll drain our power reserves significantly. Shields, weapons, propulsion. They'll all be compromised for at least a few minutes. A few minutes. In a battle this intense, that was an eternity. But Kayla knew it was their only chance. Understood, she said. Prepare the reactor for the pulse. Calder, alert the fleet. Tell them to hold the line and buy us time. Calder nodded, his hands flying over his console. Aye, Admiral. Relaying orders. Kayla stood, her voice cutting through the chaos. This is it, people. We're going to punch a hole in their advantage, but it's going to cost us. Every second we hold out brings us closer to survival. Stay focused. Stay sharp. And remember, we are humanity's last line. The fleet rallied, their formation tightening as they fought to protect the Erebus. Fighters darted through the nebula like swarms of angry hornets, engaging the Rothak ships with relentless ferocity. Explosions lit up the crimson mist as ships on both sides fell, but humanity's resolve held firm. Reactor charge at 75%, Ortega reported. Almost there. Kayla's fists clenched as she watched the tactical display. The Rothak were closing in, their largest ships pressing the assault directly on the Erebus. The enemy seemed to sense the shift in tactics, their movements becoming even more aggressive. Reactor at 100%, Ortega shouted. Ready to fire on your command. Do it, Kayla ordered. The Erebus unleashed a pulse of pure energy, radiating out like a tidal wave. The crimson mist writhed and recoiled as the pulse tore through the nebula, disrupting the Rothak ship's energy fields. Their glowing weapons dimmed, their movements faltered, and for the first time, they looked vulnerable. Direct hit, Calder exclaimed. The pulse destabilized their systems. Several ships are completely disabled. Cheers erupted on the bridge, but Kayla's expression remained hard. Don't celebrate yet. Target their largest ships while they're vulnerable. All remaining firepower. Focus on taking them down. The fleet responded with brutal efficiency, hammering the Rothak ships with everything they had. One by one, the enemy vessels fell, their once imposing forms reduced to drifting wreckage. But the battle wasn't over. In the distance, the crimson mist began to stir again, the faint outlines of more Rothak ships emerging from the depths. Kayla took a deep breath, steeling herself for what was to come. We've bought ourselves some time, she said. Now we need to find out what we're really up against and how to end this for good. The crimson horizon still held its secrets, and Kayla Sloan was determined to uncover them. The Erebus glided through the nebula's crimson haze, its hull scorched but intact. The fleet reassembled, battered yet resolute, while Kayla Sloan surveyed the tactical display. The Rothak's retreat had bought them a moment's respite, but the quiet was unnerving. She knew the enemy wasn't gone. Not yet. Admiral, long-range scanners are still unreliable, Calder reported, his face grim. But we're detecting faint energy fluctuations deeper in the nebula. Could be the source of their power. Kayla nodded. That's where we're headed. Ortega, I need every scrap of data we have on the pulse effect. How much did it weaken their connection to the nebula? Ortega's voice came through the comms, tinged with cautious optimism. It was effective, but temporary. The nebula is already restabilizing. If we're going to cripple them for good, We'll need to find the core of their energy source and take it out. Kayla turned to Calder. Any sign of survivors from the Rethak ships we disabled? Negative, Admiral, Calder replied. No escape pods, no life signs. Either they abandoned their ships before the attack, or they don't operate like we do. Kayla frowned. We need answers. Calder, prep an away team. We're boarding the wreckage of one of their vessels. The crew exchanged uneasy glances. Boarding a Rethak ship was a gamble. No one knew what they would find inside. But Kayla's resolve was unshaken. If they were to stand any chance against the Rethak, they needed to understand their enemy. Minutes later, the Erebus's boarding craft launched, slicing through the nebula toward the closest disabled Rethak ship. Its hull was jagged and organic, pulsing faintly with an eerie red glow. The closer they drew, the more the crew felt the ship's oppressive presence, like it was alive and watching them. Docking now, Lieutenant Commander Anya said, her voice steady despite the tension. She led the boarding team, her rifle at the ready as the docking clamps latched onto the alien hull. The airlock hissed open, revealing a dim, mist-filled corridor that seemed to twist and pulse unnaturally. Keep it tight, Rise ordered, her team stepping cautiously into the alien ship. Their lights cut through the mist, illuminating walls that seemed to breathe, their surfaces shifting like living tissue. Strange symbols glowed faintly, unreadable yet hypnotic. "Admiral, we're inside," Rise said over the comms. "The ship, it's not just advanced. It's alive." Kayla's voice came through, calm and measured. "Proceed carefully. Focus on finding their core systems. We need intel on how they're drawing power from the nebula." The team pressed on, their footsteps muffled by the soft, almost fleshy floor. Suddenly, a low hum resonated through the ship, and the walls began to shift more violently. "Movement," one of the team members shouted, raising their weapon. Shadows flickered at the edges of their lights, and a shape emerged, a tall, sinewy figure with glowing red eyes. It moved with unnatural speed, lunging toward the team. Rise fired, her shot striking the figure. It let out an unearthly screech before collapsing, its body disintegrating into mist. More shapes appeared in the darkness, their movements erratic and inhuman. "Admiral, we've got hostiles," Rise called, her voice sharp. "They're defending the ship. Get what you can and get out of there," Kayla ordered. "We can't afford to lose anyone." The team fought their way deeper into the ship, retrieving fragments of alien technology and scanning the ship's core. Rise's voice came through again, strained but triumphant. "Admiral, we've got something, a central node connected to the nebula's energy field. We're transmitting the data now." The feed cut off as another wave of creatures attacked, forcing the team to retreat. The boarding craft disengaged just as the Rethak ship began to pulse violently, its hull destabilizing. On the bridge of the Erebus, Kayla watched as the alien vessel imploded, vanishing into the crimson mist. The data stream from the boarding team flickered onto the tactical display, a map of the nebula with a singular glowing point at its center. "Admiral," Calder said, his voice steady but grim. "That's their core, their lifeline." Kayla's gaze hardened. "Then that's where we're going. Set a course for the heart of the nebula. It's time to end this." The fleet moved forward, deeper into the abyss, as the crimson mist seemed to close in around them. The final confrontation with the Rethak was coming, and Kayla knew it would decide not just their survival, but the fate of humanity's future. The Erebus cut through the deepening crimson mist, its engine struggling against the dense energy field that seemed to thrum with a life of its own. The fleet followed, formation tight, the black void of space barely visible beyond the nebula's thick, swirling gases. Every ship felt the weight of the upcoming battle, the looming confrontation with the heart of the Rethak's power. The tactical display flickered briefly, revealing a pulsing energy signature deep within the nebula. It was like a heartbeat, a rhythm that felt wrong, unnatural. Calder stood by Kayla, his brow furrowed. "That's it. he said, his voice tight with anticipation. That's the Rethak's core. Kayla nodded. Prepare for anything. Ortega, status on our systems. Power levels are stable, Ortega replied, her voice laced with focus. Shields are holding at 45%. We've made some modifications based on the Rethak data, but we're still dealing with their energy fluctuations. The closer we get, the more unstable our systems will become. Kayla's eyes never left the display. She knew they were walking a razor's edge. If they didn't destroy the core now, the Rethak would regroup and retaliate with a fury humanity hadn't yet seen. The fleet emerged into a vast, open expanse within the nebula, the view shifting as the stars beyond the mist came into view. At the center of this dark expanse, a massive structure floated, a colossal, organic sphere pulsating with an eerie crimson glow. It was alive. Kayla could feel it, like the nebula itself was watching them, listening, waiting. Admiral, Calder said, his voice a whisper. What are we looking at? That thing. It's their power source, Kayla interrupted, her eyes narrowing. The Rethak built it. It's feeding directly off the energy of the nebula, drawing it into their ships. Without it, they're nothing. We need to destroy it then, Calder said, determination in his tone. All our efforts lead here. Kayla turned, locking eyes with her crew. We're not just destroying a power source. We're attacking their very foundation. This is what's been fueling their fleet. If we strike at the core, it's not just about weakening them. It's about breaking their will. We end this now. The fleet edged closer, weapons primed. The Rethak had no defenses around the core. Perhaps they underestimated humanity's resolve, or perhaps they were preparing for something else. Suddenly, the nebula pulsed violently, and the core itself seemed to shimmer, its surface rippling like water disturbed by an unseen force. Something's happening, Ortega reported. The core's energy output is spiking. It's reacting to our presence. Before Kayla could respond, the first of the Rethak ships appeared, emerging from the mist like a phantom, silent, deadly. Then another and another. In moments, they were surrounded. They were waiting for us, Kayla muttered, gripping her chair. This isn't just a power source. It's a trap. The fleet's communications lit up with urgent messages, officers scrambling to adjust their strategies. But Kayla's mind was clear. They had no choice. There would be no retreat. Take evasive action, she ordered. Get as close to the core as possible. We need to make that shot. The Erebus veered sharply, breaking formation as enemy ships closed in, launching their deadly energy lances. The fleet scattered, trying to keep the Rethak at bay, but the enemy was relentless, pressing in from all sides. As the Rethak ships moved in, their weapons fired with deadly accuracy, cutting through the Erebus's shields like a hot knife through butter. We've got incoming, Calder shouted, his voice tight with tension. 2 cruisers, targeting our starboard side. Fire back. Kayla commanded. Give them everything we've got. The Erebus unleashed a barrage of energy blasts, striking the nearest cruiser. For a moment, it flickered, its energy shields flashing as the ship reeled from the impact. But the Rethak vessel quickly recovered, retaliating with a blast that rocked the Erebus to its core. We've lost shields. Hull integrity at 70%. Ortega's voice came through urgently. We're not backing down, Kayla shouted, eyes locked on the shimmering core ahead. All ships converge on the core. It's now or never. The fleet surged forward, weapons blazing, fighters weaving through the chaos of incoming fire. The Rethak's assault was unrelenting, but the human resolve was even fiercer. Kayla's heart pounded as she watched the core grow larger, its energy field unstable, threatening to tear apart the very fabric of space. The Erebus was the first to reach it, its weapons primed for the final strike. This is it, Kayla whispered. For Earth. She gave the order. And the final battle for humanity's survival began. The Erebus tore through the mist, its hull screaming under the strain of battle. Kayla stood tall at the helm, unyielding, even as the ship rattled from the constant barrage of Rathak fire. Every blast sent tremors through her bones, but her eyes were fixed ahead, on the heart of the storm, the source of the Rathak's power. They had come too far to turn back now. "Admiral, the core is in range," Calder announced, his voice filled with urgency. "If we hit it with everything we've got, we might disable it. But we won't survive another round of this." "We don't need to survive," Kayla replied, her voice steady despite the chaos. "We need to win." The Rathak fleet closed in, their ships darting through the nebula with deadly precision. Each one seemed to move in perfect harmony, a cold, calculated execution of war. But they underestimated humanity's determination. Kayla could feel the heat of their drive, their will to survive, coursing through her veins like a firestorm. The Erebus dodged another salvo, twisting sharply to avoid the incoming fire. A series of explosions lit up the rear view, a desperate attempt by the fleet to break free from the encroaching enemy. "Reyes," Kayla barked, "target the core's support structures. We need to destabilize it from the inside. No direct shots. This isn't a conventional target." "Understood, Admiral," Reyes replied over the comms. "We're on it." The Erebus was within firing range now, and Kayla's hands hovered over the controls. Every ship in the fleet was maneuvering into position, their weapons aimed at the core. The tension in the air was palpable, thick with anticipation. The Rathak ships seemed to sense the shift, closing in to protect their prize. They came in waves, launching everything they had: energy lances, missiles, even biological weapons. The air on the bridge grew thick with the hum of energy blasts and the crackle of burning circuits. The shields held, barely, but Kayla knew it wouldn't last. They were down to their last reserves. "Admiral," Ortega shouted, her voice tight with panic, "we've got a critical systems failure. The reactor's starting to overheat. Divert power to the weapons and shields." Kayla snapped, her mind working faster than ever. "We need to hold off for just a little longer." "Less than 5 minutes of power left," Ortega reported, her tone grim. "We're pushing the Erebus to its limits." Kayla nodded. She knew the stakes. It was now or never. "Fighters, break through their lines and create a gap," Kayla commanded. "Give the fleet room to maneuver. The core must be hit. Now." A swarm of human fighters surged into the fray, darting through the hail of Rathak fire. They danced around the larger ships, launching precise strikes on weak points, breaking their formation. The Rathak retaliated fiercely, but the human pilots fought with unparalleled ferocity, knowing that every second counted. "Admiral," Calder said, his voice calm but urgent, "the core is weakening. We've got a shot." "Fire," Kayla shouted, her pulse pounding in her ears. The Erebus's weapon systems unleashed a concentrated barrage of energy, the shots blinding in their intensity as they slammed into the core's outer structure. The core rippled, its surface cracking as the force of the blast reverberated through the nebula. But the core didn't shatter, not yet. Instead, it pulsed with a violent energy, as if it were fighting back, alive and in rage. "Direct hit." Rice's voice rang through the comms. "We've destabilized the core's outer layer, but we need more." "Then we give it everything," Kayla said, her face set with unyielding resolve. "All ships, fire at will. We finish this now." The fleet obeyed, unleashing their full firepower on the core. The nebula's energy began to churn, swirling violently, as if the fabric of space itself was being torn apart. The Rathak ships attempted to regroup, but the core's instability was spreading, affecting their systems. Ships flickered in and out of existence, their energy systems collapsing under the pressure of the assault. "Admiral," Ortega warned, "we're losing all power. The reactor's critical." Kayla didn't flinch. "Hold steady. We're almost there." And then, with a final, thunderous explosion, the core erupted. The shockwave reverberated through the nebula, sending a cascade of energy pulsing outward, shattering the Rethek fleet in a brilliant cascade of light and destruction. The core, once the beating heart of their power, collapsed in on itself, its energy dissipating into the void. The remaining Rethek ships were caught in the explosion, disintegrating as the nebula's energy field imploded. The Erebus was tossed violently, spinning uncontrollably as the shockwave rocked the ship. For a moment, everything was chaos. Then, silence. On the bridge, Kayla slowly stood, her eyes locked on the view ahead. The nebula had returned to its dark, still state, the heart of the storm now a smoldering ruin. The Rethek fleet was gone. The galaxy was silent. "We did it," Calder whispered, his voice reverent. Kayla turned to face her crew, her heart pounding in her chest. "Not yet," she said. "This is just the beginning." The silence after the explosion was deafening, a vast, empty void that stretched out beyond the wreckage of the Rethek fleet. The Erebus drifted in the midst of it, a lone survivor amidst the ruins of an enemy empire. Kayla stood at the bridge, staring out into the cold expanse of space. Her crew, battered but unbroken, was still recovering from the chaos. There was no celebration yet, just the quiet realization that they had won, but the cost was still unknown. Ortega's voice cut through the stillness. "Admiral, we're still alive. Shields are down to 15%, and reactor output is dangerously low, but we're holding." Kayla gave a slight nod. "How many ships are left in the fleet?" "Most of the smaller craft have been wiped out," Calder replied, scanning the tactical displays. "But we still have the Valor and the Guardian, both heavily damaged but intact. The Rethek fleet is gone. We've won." Her heart swelled with a mixture of relief and sorrow. They had done it. They had struck at the core of the Rethek's power and torn their entire fleet apart. Yet, the toll was evident. Lives had been lost. Humanity's expansion had been pushed to the edge, and it had cost more than anyone had anticipated. "Prepare a status report for the Council," Kayla said, her voice steady despite the weight of it all. "Tell them we've won the battle, but the war is far from over." The crew moved to their stations, working with quiet efficiency. Kayla walked to the observation window, her eyes focused on the void. The nebula had begun to calm, its crimson hue dimming as the energy field began to dissipate. In the distance, the remnants of the Rethek fleet floated like broken fragments of a shattered dream. They had struck a decisive blow, but the Rethek weren't the only force they would face. Humanity's expansion into the stars had come at a price, and now they had to rebuild, not only their fleets but their alliances, their strength, and their future. "Admiral, we're receiving a transmission from the Council," Ortega announced. Kayla turned, her expression unreadable. "Put it through." The face of Counselor Darius appeared on the screen, his eyes filled with a mix of gratitude and concern. "Admiral Kayla, you've done the impossible. The Rethek are no more. The galaxy owes you and your fleet a debt we can never repay." Kayla didn't speak immediately, her mind racing. "Thank you, Counselor. But the Rethek were only one part of the puzzle. We've won this battle, but there are still other threats out there. Other powers who will see humanity's rise as a challenge. The galaxy will not sit idly by." Darius's expression darkened. "We understand, Admiral. The cost of peace is never free. But your victory today has bought us time. Time to prepare. Time to unite the factions, to form a stronger front. You are right. This is just the beginning." "I hope you're ready," Kayla said, her voice firm. "Humanity has already proven what it's capable of. We won't stop now." As the transmission ended, Kayla turned back to the window, the weight of her words lingering in the air. She wasn't just a soldier anymore. She was a symbol of humanity's unyielding will. The battles they had won had brought them this far, but the real fight for the future of the galaxy was just beginning. "Admiral, we've received an encrypted message from the Valiant," Calder said, breaking the silence. "It's from Commander Riker." "Put it through," Kayla ordered. Riker's face appeared on the screen, weary but alive. "Kayla, we've got word from the outer colonies. They're beginning to push back against the Rothak's remnants. The threat is dissipating, but we'll need support. They're calling for reinforcements." Kayla clenched her fists, the fire in her heart reigniting. "Reinforcements will come. We'll rebuild, and we'll expand. This time, we do it on our terms." The Erebus drifted through the aftermath of the battle, its crew rallying together, battered but resolute. Kayla knew the true cost of what they had accomplished. But more importantly, she knew the potential that lay ahead. Humanity's place in the galaxy had been secured, but their future, one filled with expansion, discovery, and yes, conflict, was just beginning. The horizon had changed. The path forward was uncharted, but humanity would push forward into the unknown, and they would not falter.